Okay. 10%. So what about 9?
It's only going to be 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
And then we got 7 in the board.
Oh, we need 7. Okay, that's what I was like. There's only 3.
Yeah, and then I'm
So are we good to start?
Oh. Yeah.
You have your PowerPoint ready to go?
That's how deep that's deep.
Sarah, you ready? I call the meeting to order. Derek, can you do roll call, please?
Mayor Corbett. Alderman Spicer.
Here.
Alderman Matthews.
Here.
Alderman Silver.
Here.
Alderman Wall.
Here.
Mr. McCormick. Ms. Collado. Mr. Murphy.
Here.
Ms. P.
Here.
Mr. White. Here.
Motion to discuss or approve the agenda.
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. New business. Discuss land regulations update. Regis?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, thank you for bearing with me I didn't put any information in your packet on purpose. So I wanted this to be more of us providing you with information, and then toward the end, we'll get feedback from everybody, department heads, board of mayor and aldermen, and planning commissioners, as we get ready to update our land use regulations right now. So we'll go over the agenda. We'll give you an overview of the need and the purpose, reasons for land use regulations, then the role of the steering committee that we all will play as a part of this, review the assessment and needs of the issue, get input, and address those needs and issues, and review the outline, and then talk about next steps. As you know, what we deal with the zoning ordinance on a day-to-day basis. We have several components. We have the land use, we have subdivision regs, we have the zoning ordinance, we have the commercial design standards. All those sort of are kind of govern how we grow, how we decide on things. A lot of it is mandated by the Tennessee Annotated Code, but we have a hodgepodge of things that we've been working with since 1995. And if you look at our zoning ordinance, if you've ever been to the ordinance, it says, created in 95, which it was good for the time it was created, but even we struggle with the changes that have been made over time. It'll say C 2008 or C 2014, and it's just a hodgepodge, and it's time for an update. But with this land use regulation, we also have our comprehensive plan, which the zoning ordinance it should marry the comprehensive plan and how we grow, which the comp plan was just approved in 2019, and almost time for a new update. But we want all of these things to be married into one document, so we're not pulling from 20 different directions. So, it was, time for a new update. So we went through a round of sorting through proposals, requests for proposals. Kimley Horn, they did win the bid. They've also done our Parks Master Plan update, and their planning staff is quite knowledgeable. One of the things we decided when looking at the proposals was that we wanted somebody to come in and make this our zoning ordinance and not a developer. Kimley Horn is really strong on making it ours and not just, some, planning firm to come in and do that. With this, I'll pass it over to our team of presenters.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I'm Kelly Clever, and I'm our team's project lead. With me is Josh, and we also have George, who's part of the core team that is serving the city in sieges, and Sean, and of course Jenna here. We came to this with I'll say, eyes wide open approach. I've been doing this, working in municipalities for over 32 years. I'm going to ask you a very simple, basic question. What were you doing in 1995? Jenna probably wasn't born. George, I know wasn't.
I was in high school.
I was, as one of our office assistants called me, the pup planner for the Knoxville-Knox County Metropolitan Planning Commission. This was red. There was more of this, and there was no gray. So So, Steve just talked about something very, very critical in this process. Your code was actually last updated almost 30 plus years ago. Your comprehensive plan is 2017 to 2019, so there again, you've got 8 years. How much has changed in that since 1995? One of the running jokes I also like to say is, 6 or 7 years ago, who had ever heard of pickleball?
Funny topic. What?
I know, it's one of those things, believe it or not, 1965 out in the great Northwest. But there again, it's one of those things. Who'd ever thought 5, 6 years ago that we would have as much as we do with the Walmarts and some of these big boxes where it's the drive up, pick up, and leave without having to go into the store? Whoever thought, 5 years ago that we'd be having everything come to our house from a master delivery service where we don't have to leave our house anymore? One of the things that we started to identify, we started to look at when we were going through the code. Now, and it's not just the 3 of us. We've got a core team that is engineers, landscape architects, urban planners, urban designers. And we started looking at a lot of different things, and we were starting to ask a bunch of the tough questions. And that's where we started to kind of come up with, what is the framework? There again, we have to start looking at it from a consistency standpoint. The comprehensive plan sets the stage because everything that we do is supposed to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. State law, Tennessee Code annotated, says you've got to meet certain criteria and provisions, so it makes things that much more fun. But then, as he just said, 1995, so you've got a number of things that have occurred or not occurred since that time frame. So, we're not going to go through this. I know it's fairly small print. We can get you hard copies, and actually Ceges and Sean can. But just kind of lays out a couple of the things as far as what are the key components of the comprehensive plan to the zoning ordinance, the subdivision regulations, the commercial design standards, as well as the sign ordinance. All of these things we started going through, and we started asking the questions, why? Anybody have a nephew or a grandson who's 5 years old, 4 years old? What do they always do? Why? 5 whys or 5 hows. Why is it this? Well, why is that? And you keep going down that until you get to the point either you're like, okay, we have no idea, or because it was in the code back then. So that's where we start to say, like Steve just said, right-sizing your code, and more importantly, making it specific to White House itself. I almost said Whitehall. Ooh, that's a bad one. So why update it? You've seen a tremendous amount of growth. And that's, since 1995, you've grown almost 400%. Sounds like a lot. When you start looking at those numbers, that's a tremendous amount. Where are these people living? Where are they working? Where are they recreating? Places like, Josh and I were talking about, we were driving around and looking at different things, and talking through different components. And talking with Ceges, it's like, well, where's the growth going? What's going on with the west side? What about the industrial development? What's going on here isn't just going on here. It's an offshoot of what's going on into the greater metropolitan area as well. So there again, trying to get in and start looking at that code, and more importantly, understanding the what and why. So, what are some of the key objectives that we have? There again, I'm not going to read through all of these, but more importantly, it is to modernize your code. It is to right-size, consolidate those key components where they need to be consolidated. Updating your zoning map, creating some new processes that will enable staff to be able to do certain things with a little bit more clarity and certainty, and more importantly, about creating some of those different choices, whether it's housing or business or industry, trying to create something that implements that comprehensive plan, and Josh is going to talk about that here in just a second, that literally takes us from the plan to the code and everything in between. So what is your all's role as the steering committee? You all are the eyes, ears, and the filter for the community. We're going to be passing things off through you, through staff, to come up with kind of what are we seeing, what are we hearing, and starting to kind of test that code component here with this group. Now, is this going to mean that everybody on this committee is going to agree on everything that we say or do? No. But at the same time, if we miss it, this is the filter that we need before we ever get to those formal public hearings and the formal adoption. Why? Because this is a broad cross-section, as you can see on the screen, from staff to community to a lot of different aspects that have a working knowledge of the code, but also a working knowledge of what's going on in the community. What feels right, what sounds right, what can be built. So when we started looking at some of the assessment, and I do appreciate the fact that Sean spent a lot of time, actually I'm still in this slide, Sean. This is actually really good. But 5 basic buckets. So we started looking at what some of those general components that we're starting to look through. What about from the zoning districts? The standards, when we start talking about how far away from a building line should a building be placed, how tall is it, how many parking spaces, we start talking about the enforcement. So as something is being built or something is being used, is it being used correctly? And then signage. Signage is one of those critical components, and Josh is going to walk us through a little bit of here in a minute as far as consistency with what we always call the Reed case, consistency with Austin. So some of those kind of terms that you'll hear us go and talk about from time to time. We didn't come into this with any preconceived ideas, but we just point blank started to ask, are we throwing the baby out with the bathwater, or are we retaining? Bad dad joke here, but in some cases, some of this will need to go. Some of it's old, some of it's outdated. That's where, we're coming at this with best planning and engineering practices, working through staff and embedding it through this group here. They're going to right size the code specific to White House. Josh?
Thanks, Kelly. As Regis and Kelly have mentioned, we've been spending the last few months in an analysis mode. We've been combing through the current ordinances and design standards and finding out, what's outdated, what works, what doesn't. And, the biggest kind of overall observation, which goes back to this slide, is there's been enough patchwork over the years with your ordinance that it's better at this point to kind of start anew and create a whole new set of guidelines with many consistencies with what you currently have, but with a more cohesive kind of organization. And so what we've done is kind of a full 360-degree review of what's going on in Middle Tennessee. We've looked at, when and how other neighboring jurisdictions have done updates, and you can see there's been a lot of that happening over the last 2 years. Kelly and myself have been working across Middle Tennessee and across the Southeast doing this kind of work, and so it's not surprising when you see that, Goodlettsville in 2018 and Columbia just had a code update in 2022. You guys are long overdue. So it's good to kind of look collectively around the region to understand, as everybody's seeing growth, they're also seeing the need to update and modernize their standards. We just pulled some graphic examples from other ordinances that we felt like had a lot of similarities and some consistencies with what we would like to accomplish. As we get into this rewrite of the code, you're going to see these types of more user-friendly tables and graphics. That's going to benefit your staff as staff turns over and you hire new people and you grow. It's all about handing the baton and being able to have a system of processes that will allow the city to kind of function smoothly. It'll help your public sector, your developer community understand the code and understand the expectations as well, and better be able to navigate and allow your staff to be efficient with applications as they come through the system. These are some of the flow charts that you see. That it really does help people understand, because you might have a custom home builder or a first-time business owner that wants to start up a new business, and you open up a 300-page zoning ordinance, and it's very daunting. So creating some flow charts and process expectations for how you navigate through each step of the city process will really help streamline the system, and that's going to be part of the update that you see throughout the course of this. Similarly, we're going to be adding easier to understand tables and graphics that allows people to see a collection of information in one place, as opposed to have to peel through multiple chapters and sections of the code and find hidden bits of information. Nolensville and Franklin have done a really neat job with their bulk standards and their signage guidelines. Just examples of how graphics really help to better tell the story of your development criteria moving forward. And so, as we mentioned, we're on a fact-finding mission. You guys are the steering committee. You're kind of the first gatekeepers of this process. And so we're here today to share with you some of the information that we have learned, kind of combing through your existing ordinance, relating it back to your more recently updated comprehensive plan, and just point out some observations. At the end of this presentation, we're looking to get some input from you, hear about challenges that you've had trying to govern as boards and commissions, and also advice that you have for specific items that you want to see addressed in the ordinance moving forward. So here's your current future land use map. The corridors and gateways, they're starting to take shape. You can see, as you compare it with the zoning overlay, where some of the consistencies and inconsistencies are. The observations that we've looked at, we're going to look at it kind of category by category. Currently, you have 5 commercial districts, and about 95% of your commercial zoning is in one district. And there's 1 or 2 other districts that have smatterings of commercial uses as well. Right now, C3 and C5 are not utilized at all. So these are the types of things that we look at to understand, all right, let's simplify and streamline this code so that it's easier for your staff to both manage and for the public community, the development community to understand your intent on how you want the city to develop. In the residential districts, a couple of the observations here are that R40 is currently not utilized. The R20 and the R15 are really similar. So how can we combine and streamline various districts so that there are more logical decisions to make and logical goals for your staff to manage. Industrials, also similar. The I3, there's not anything currently existing. There's ways to streamline into potentially 2 industrial zoning districts moving forward. And PUDs in particular, I will say, you guys have seen me up here before. I've been working in ordinances for 25 years, and so as a boots on the ground perspective, and having spent a tremendous amount of time in your code, that PUD section can be that baby thrown out with the bathwater. And I think by working with y'all as the steering committee, we can create a new PUD section that will better achieve your expectations and goals, both on a commercial and a residential standpoint.
Can I jump in? And so if you look at look at some of the older designs of neighborhoods, like the one that Mr. Lord did in can't think right on top of my head, but the older designs where the garages are facing different ways and things like that, that had to be removed, I think, during the recession because the city was understanding wasn't getting any builders, but that was taken out. And so you may see some neighborhoods with a PUD designation, but aren't true PUDs. A true PUD is dictated by the density. It'll have character in the neighborhood. So that's some of the things that we're kind of addressing. I just wanted to kind of make a comment on that, but some of the things that we talked about is just adding character to the neighborhood going forward.
Yeah, Jenna and Cedric and Sean have been a wealth of knowledge. Like I said, we spent the last few months on meetings every other week as we're kind of digging in and analyzing your current code and your current GIS and zoning data and bouncing it off of them. We're getting a lot of those tidbits of kind of anecdotal information about, hey, this has been a challenge, or hey, this has worked well, or hey, we're having a really tough time managing sign guidelines and enforcing that. So there's a lot of things that we know need to be addressed. Wrapping up the topic of zoning districts, this was our GIS analysis. We took your GIS database, we looked at every acre within your city limits, and we looked at their zoning and their sizes and kind of mapped across that board. I don't have my computer glasses on, so it's a little hard, but
we can't see anything.
Yeah.
It's like everything we've seen right now, we have barely any idea what y'all are talking about because we can't see the slides, but it would have been beneficial to be able to see them to understand more of what you're talking about.
Well, and our hope was that we were in the downstairs room with a bigger screen, so I apologize we ended up on the small screens this evening. We're happy to share the presentation that y'all can zoom in on, and we can have some follow-up.
Can we get a copy of the hard copy of the presentation?
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, what you're finding across here is, as you see the X's and the columns vertically, you can see that's where the uses are showing up. So that's why you have the ag on the far left, the R40, and the next column, R20. That's where, a high percentage of there's over 1,000 acres of R20 zone land. The R10 and the R15 have another kind of medium portion of land. And so this was the analysis that we used to identify what is currently zoned in your city today, and what districts are being used, which districts are not being used, and we're going to use that information to consolidate and simplify the zoning districts moving forward. Any questions or comments about that?
So we have nothing R40 anymore?
I think
Farmers Reserve was the last thing that was, well, no, that was agricultural.
Yeah, there are.
Yeah, there are no
any
R40.
large lots.
Within the city limits.
It's city limits.
Right.
Well, what happens if it's not in the new regs?
I mean, you could develop above, like if you were in an R20 zone district, you could still do a 40,000
Yeah, you
square
could.
foot lot and do, septic or,
Just wanna make sure that, that's not taken out, where they can still have that option, because right now, I'd like to see us go that direction.
Well, that's what we're gonna discuss,
Yeah.
like some creative mechanisms for
Right.
larger, even the PUDs, we could dictate this hypothetically acre lots in PUDs, we could do different types of design. But that's kind of the purpose, is to get this feedback.
Yeah, just to say that, and just because the data shows there's nothing today, like our suggestion that we're contemplating internally is to combine ag and R40 into like an agricultural reserve, residential reserve type group, so that it meets the intent of kind of both of those things. And again, we're here collecting information from y'all tonight, and as we start disseminating back, you'll have some hard data to work from, and you'll have more legible documents that you will have seen before the discussion, and we'll have a mutual and constructive conversation.
Yeah, this isn't to say this is what we're doing, but just like you said, to get feedback for what you want to see in the zoning ordinance. Land use regs overall.
So here's where we're going to ask you for some of your initial feedback and input. And Mr. Murphy, just to clarify, we will make sure that you all have hard copies of this. I was also talking with CGIS. We'll make sure that a copy of this is available to be put onto the city's website as well, with the blessing of administration, of course. But, there again, this is one of those initial discussions where we're asking the question, does this seem right? Does it feel okay? Because we've got this path that we're getting ready to go down, as Josh said, where we're going to start making some recommendations for consolidation of districts, making some differentiation between other districts. You've got a lot of residential districts that are very, very similar, do you really need the number of residential districts that you have? For a community this size, you probably have about twice as many as you really need. Now, where does that start to come into play even more so? Like Steve just said, the PUDs. We've got enough flexibility, whether it's a rural or a suburban PUD, to be able to kind of, work within the confines of sanitary sewer versus no sanitary sewer, or water or wells or things like that. So we've got the ability to start to look at what are some of those minimums. Just because that we say, oh, this is an R20, doesn't mean that everything in that area is R20. It just means they have the ability to do that. If somebody still wants to do a 5-acre tract in that, that's still allowed. We're not taking those rights away, we're just creating some additional options. You start looking at the growth, almost 16,000 people in this community, 400% growth since 1995. Where are they living? What kind of housing choices do we have? Is everybody in a single family house? Where are they shopping? So that's the reason, here's where we're going to start asking for some feedback in between Josh, myself, and also George. We're going to start kind of pulling together some of your comments. And again, these are intended to be high level. We're also going to task you with some homework between now and the next 2 weeks. After you leave here tonight, and you get a chance to kind of really look through the PowerPoint and asking yourself some of these questions and making some of those answers, provide some feedback to CGIS and Jenna and Sean as far as these are the things that I think are important to me. These are the things that we need to really be thinking about because of this. So when we start talking about commercial districts, we've kind of come up and we're looking at the mapping, looking at the future land use. There again, we're saying it's probably a little heavy on the number of commercial districts, just like the number of residential zoning districts. So one of our initial recommendations is to look at right-sizing the number of districts and right-sizing those standards as well. So, when we start to take things away, we've got to make sure we have enough flexibility, whether it's through another mixed use or another form of a PUD. But in your all's dealings, do you have, just ballpark, do you have too many residential districts that you're trying to figure out what's what in right now and what's being applied? Good match?
No, we don't. Now, see, just, you can answer that question. I don't think we have enough information to answer that
Right.
question. And the thing is that what is the detriment of having too many? I mean, because they are specific and they are laid out and.
They're based on 1995, it's just an older code, and I feel like if you look at surrounding cities,
Yeah.
we could make it better, to be honest.
Yeah, I just wanted to know
Right.
why too many is
Because we
not
have
good.
something that we're not using, like C5 and C3,
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, and I know you guys don't deal with anything zoning related until we bring it to you. Planning Commission mostly will deal with rezonings, and we hadn't had many in the last, we hadn't had many rezonings,
We
but
did
most of,
previously.
but most of the people that come are rezoning with PUDs. But with that though, there's really no, he made a point about minimum, so if somebody wants to do a 40,000 square foot lot, or even an acre lot, there's no guidance in our zoning ordinance currently. So again, I wanna be kind of, transparent, make you understand, like a PUD. So the plan unit development, when somebody gets that rezone, that plan is what's in place.
Well, here's a perfect example from a commercial standpoint. We currently have like 6 commercial zoning districts, and 2 of them are office park type districts. And, office parks are a thing of the 90s. It's I think, encouraging a mixed use type development where you have commercial and office and even some retail and commercial areas is a more, contemporary way of thinking about land use. And so, if you take a minute and read just the description of each of your commercial districts in the zoning ordinance, they almost read the same. And
But there are exceptions within those.
There are those,
There
but
are.
I think, you could take the 2 office districts and create one and still allow the same uses that the previous ones did. As opposed to kind of like, dictating where, you want zoning to occur. But, we're trying to simplify it for you and for your staff.
Yeah, especially for your staff.
So I have a question. So we're not updating the comprehensive plan that was done in 2019?
No.
Even though we've grown a lot since.
We have
2019, and we plan on growing a lot more past.
It'll be time for the
now.
comprehensive plan update in about a year, 2 years. So we will update it, but this is specifically dealing with the land use regulations. There will be time where I'm gonna come back, at budget hearing, and ask for the update of the plan. But,
When we update the comprehensive plan, we won't have to then turn around and update this plan.
No, I think this process will help inform the decisions you make for the comprehensive plan.
I was thinking this will help.
Yeah, so, the biggest thing is, yes, a lot of times, you've got really old code, a fairly recent comprehensive plan that's getting ready to be updated, but in the meantime, we're trying to fix this. And I'm gonna go off on one tangent real quick. Most communities do exactly what you did. This isn't anything against you as a community or staff. I know it's kind of like saying, this is not a backhanded compliment, but whenever we start to address an issue, we always add more to the codes than we start to look at what's going on within the code itself. And that's where Sieges in this community had the foresight to say, time out, let's take a look instead of just adding, and there's a lot of inconsistencies. And that's one of the tasks that we're looking to clean up. The code that we're talking about here is going to help kind of inform everything that Sieges and his staff is doing. But also, we're trying to look ahead to the future enough to where, whatever comes out of that comprehensive plan, if there are amendments, they're minor. Very, very minimal. So we're trying to look at this from the context of a comprehensive plan and the next 10 years worth of growth as well.
And currently it's pretty convoluted.
Oh, yeah, I mean, you have to search and try to
Yeah.
find it. There's no links to anything.
You reference this and you reference
And
that.
that's
Sieges
one of the
and
things that I would like
we
to
had
see.
this conversation a few days ago, we had about C6, so, I just want, so basically we're just gonna clean it up, make it a little more user friendly.
Enforcement mechanism.
Yeah, user friendly would be nice.
User-friendly is a big one, and like you can see on here, parking. When I'm talking to my team, and I've got an incredible team, in my office, plus, partnering with Josh and his team. A couple of core things that we always start to look at, the districts, parking, signage, landscaping, and buffering. You deal with those 4, you pretty much dealt with the majority of your code. Parking, what 2 days out of the year do we ultimately design parking lots for? the day after Thanksgiving, the day after Christmas. Most communities, and I was guilty of this when I was in Georgetown, Kentucky, is we're going to design for the maximum based off of those 2 dates instead of right-sizing and trying to get a little bit more creative. Now, some communities we've been talking to, of course, you know, you want to keep your minimums. You're not at the stage to where you can get rid of your minimums and say, market be damned, you can do whatever you want. You're not at that stage, nor am I a big advocate for that. But also trying to right-size the parking, not saying that there's a hard cap on the amount of parking, but at a certain point, are there alternatives designs that the city wants to see for that over the parking above and beyond a certain extent? Is there more landscaping? Is there more stormwater? Is there more things? What are those trade-offs to go above a certain level? It's the same thing we talk about with some of the things with building heights. There again, what does the community want? This is your chance to right-size the code. Do you want to have the sea of asphalt that is parked 2 days a year at best, or do you want to try to get something that's a little bit more user-friendly at that point? The other thing that we start to look at from the parking, especially with some of these mixed-use centers, some of the, I'll say, the commercial types of PUD, is having some level of bicycle parking, some level of, you know, scooter, or something other than just cars. So trying to, there again, incorporate those kinds of standards into the parking is another thing. You know, one of the things I will tell you is bicycles are still there. People still use them. I still use it. People are using the scooters. You may think, I'll never see it here, but guess what? You will. What are we thinking about in the next 10 years? EV parking is coming up. It's a big item. There's actually a federal push to, you know, incentivize some of that. State,
And
yeah.
two other things.
I know.
Okay.
We're going to keep it at that level and say it.
There's a push.
Two other things related to parking that have evolved since 1995. You've seen some of the trends on minimum parking go down, both from an office and a commercial standpoint. They used to have higher recommendations for numbers of parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of those uses, and those have trended down a little bit. So, you know, as we update, you can kind of right-size. As we encourage mixed-use development, there are peaks for each of those uses, the residential and the commercial, residential office and retail uses, and they use parking at different times. So those are other opportunities where you can allow the opportunity for a shared parking plan when people are doing mixed-use development. So those are some of the types of tools we want to build into your new ordinance.
Here's another question I want to ask you. Drive-through, I mean, a sit-down, not a sit-down restaurant, but a quick, what we call a QSR, a quick-serve restaurant. McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, Subway, Chick-fil-A. Are those all the exact same when it comes to parking and drive-throughs and access?
No.
No.
Look like it to me.
Why?
I've never mentioned Chick-fil-A.
Well,
Like the Super Walmart.
Yeah, so
Everybody wants one.
Just go down to the one on Metro Center and just tell me what it's like, yeah.
And I was gonna say, but yet, all of our regulations say that those are exactly the same. So that's where we're trying to come up with some alternatives to the parking challenges that we see throughout the community. The other thing that we start to see, and this is a great one that I always get a lot of staff that we work with on. You go to Walmart, you drive up, you text, you pull in that one space, you text, and they bring their stuff out. Is that technically a parking space or a loading zone? You read the definition in your code, that's a loading zone.
I was gonna say loading zone, see?
Yeah.
I've read the regs.
So smart.
Many times.
But there again, technically, that's a loading zone. Loading zones have different code requirements than parking. There's other things that start to come into play. That's where we're saying you start asking those why questions or the how questions. And there again, as Josh has said, things have been evolving. And, you know, you've got a 30-year-old code that's not bad in some places, but it needs to be refreshed. So
how would this affect businesses that we already have with the parking that they have now? It wouldn't do anything.
Big grandfather.
they're
It'd be
grandfathered.
grandfathered.
So would we create a new future zoning map is what we're gonna have, so that anything that we get torn down or anything on vacant land would now want to be complying with the new zoning map? Okay.
Yeah, anything that's built, approved, it's what we call grandfathered in, it's vested. It has a certain number of rights that if they don't change, they're fine.
And we establish a threshold that if they redevelop, you know, beyond a certain percentage, then they're having to conform with the new ordinance. like if it's greater than a 5,000 square foot, I mean, it's kind of throwing out standards I've seen before.
We do that now, so I wouldn't
Yeah.
really do that.
If their use changed,
Then it would be automatic.
Absolutely.
they would lose the grandfather if the use changed.
Right.
What happens if the use changes and they can't make the changes for the facility?
There's processes that we put in play for that as well. It's either through a variance situation or depending on the zoning district. We've also provided alternative design standards or design features to reflect some of those redevelopment options. Because greenfield's easy to develop. I mean, you just go. It's a blank slate. Whereas if you've got something like, just looking right outside your door here, trying to make that fit within the context of certain things that you have within your code, if it's not grandfathered in, there needs to be an alternative design because it is a redevelopment piece of property approach. So making sure that we've got provisions built into that to allow some level of flexibility, especially from a staff's perspective, without putting people through a series of 14 hearings with a number of variances and things like that. Parking and signs are two of the biggest ones that we usually see create the most level of discussion. Can't imagine why, especially on signs. Signage. Josh is going to hit on this a little bit more in just in a few more slides, but the sign regulations kind of go back and forth. They're very unclear when we start reading them. And we ask Steve, so what does this look like? And guess what I got? And by the way, we love working with this team because they're very open and honest, and they're very down to earth in making sure that it's kind of like, this is what we're seeing, this is what we're applying, this is how we're having to apply some of these standards. So these guys are great, and they actually care about the community, which is different than what we see in some other communities, which makes this job even that much more fun, especially from our perspective, being able to get on a call every 2 weeks with these guys, and be able to talk through, okay, here's the topic we're talking about today. Here's what are some of the current projects that are getting ready to hit or being filed at this point. How do those apply to the code we're talking about? So from a sign standpoint, being very clear on the types of signs and how we define it. Josh provided that couple of examples from Hendersonville and Owensville. Landscaping and buffering. And this is, what not only just your typical buffering, but what type of landscaping and buffering is provided. Where does that go? If you're putting a fence, where's the fence go? Does it go on the outside adjacent to the road, or does it go inside so that the trees are on the exterior facing the boundaries of the property? Creating a new committee to help support Zegis and the team here with some of those technical reviews components so that, as it's going through the process, there's another group of people that are looking at this from a technical aspect, especially based off of the new code. And then also kind of looking at some of your temporary uses, like it says here, tightening up some of the restrictions on some of those, whether it's the short-term rentals or some of the fireworks stands. And this is also one of those where we're really going to need to be able to work very closely with the city attorney, especially from an interpretation matter. Because I will tell you, working with 8 different municipal attorneys right now, I get 8 different opinions on temporary uses, short-term rentals, and signs. So that's the person who's keeping you out of the lawsuits. So we want to make sure that what we're providing is consistent for them. Let me stop there and pause. Any questions or thoughts at this point on the items that you're seeing here?
He did mention, creating some type of advisory committees. We do have a couple of boards. We had like the construction board. I can't remember if we have a design review board of some sort, but we do have a few of those that don't necessarily meet, but this would complement that. So we have some things in place already.
I think what we've seen work successfully is as a design review committee that kind of vets projects before they go to planning commission. It helps staff. Staff would bring that before a design review committee, and they would make sure to kind of be that next gate before it gets to planning commission. And so you have both a staff report and a recommendation from a design review board. So those are options, and we're here to share some options with you and just kind of get initial feedback, and as we, move into the next stage of making, producing this ordinance and sharing it with you in pieces that, you kind of have heard those terms and have maybe had a chance to think about it.
So just in the interest of time, I know you all got some more things on the agenda after us. I'm going to spend a lot of time on the emerging issues because we've hit some of those already. But just to let you know, we're in the process of providing what we call an annotated outline. So basically taking the proposed code, starting to kind of create a framework with an understanding of this is what we are proposing and recommending, and that's coming to staff for their kind of review and consideration. But they're again trying to put like things together so that they are not in 4 different portions of the code. They're all combined and consolidated into one general section. This is going to be one of those things, as part of our deliverables, we're providing that plus a review of comments that say this is what we're recommending and why. So that way, a year from now, Segis is sitting there going, well, why did we do this? He's got that record of this is what we proposed and this is why. There again, I'm not going to dive into this. You can, I would say, be able to read it on your small screen, but we'll...
Actually, if you would jump back, I think what is helpful with this more easy to read outline is that, you've asked us to look at the zoning ordinance, the commercial design guidelines, and the subdivision regulations. And our goal is to take those 3 separate documents and create a single document that is organized well in such a way that, a staff or the community using it can navigate through it. And so that's kind of what you're seeing here is chapter A is the more administrative component, B being the zoning regulations, the environmental standards is the equivalent of your subdivision regulations, and then the subdivision standards are some more of the kind of, I guess, the facilitation of the code.
One thing we mentioned in that is we have things that are in the municipal code, like stormwater. We have things that coincide in subdivision regs and zoning orders, and right now all 3 are out of whack. So it's very important to kind of align things. I keep reiterating that.
A perfect example is your buffer. There's a screening guideline in the subdivision standards and a buffer guideline in your zoning ordinance, and so it's creating those duplicative issues and creating
Should be the same thing.
Yes, they're consistent. Absolutely.
It's important to follow order. I mean, obviously ordinance overweighs, I guess, the zoning and over subdivision regs. So I mean, I would hope that we're aligning with our municipal code first. Unless there's something that needs to be changed there.
Yeah,
absolutely, because there's
it's just municipal code is sort of the hierarchy,
yeah.
And so, because a lot of things in state law, especially with wastewater and stormwater, and we just want to make sure that zoning code and sub-regs are conforming.
I agree with that, but there's different routes I have to take for different laws that are passed.
Yeah.
The fees, I see you got that under chapter A, that I think would include our impact fees. Right now, they're like in chapter 8.
Chapter 8, yeah.
Chapter 8, yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
And there again, you can kind of think through this, provide some comments and some feedback back to Segis and the team. And it's one of those things, because we will be offering up what we call the one-on-ones, the coffee chats at some point, when we get some more of these fleshed out, to where it's a one-on-one with staff, us, and whoever wants to spend 15, 30 minutes with us asking a bunch of questions before we get through the code. Because what we find is that it's very critical, especially from being able to understand and ask questions. And there again, more importantly, you're going to say this a couple times, understand what you're getting ready to be asked to vote on. So it's a great opportunity for you all to do some of those deep dives.
And just for full transparency, so they have the, our unit counts of what's, been built, time frame that's been built. They have the, the position of the board with growth. So all of that information, we said we spend time, being transparent. They have all the information, available to them to know the direction of the board and the planning commission.
Could I ask a question? Segis and Jenna, are there a top, say, half dozen aggravations that need fixing?
Yeah.
And maybe there's 10. Surely not everything is aggravated, but
all of the above. I mean, for one, permitted uses, we get calls all the time from businesses.
Okay.
You go to C2 when there's a section that says permitted use special exception. It's been piecemealed over since '95.
Yeah.
So we have to maneuver, and sometimes even have to go to the old original code in somebody else's ordinance because ours may have been erased. And so, for instance, Robertson County, the big local programs did their zoning ordinance as well. So just, navigating to see why something was deleted, what did it used to be, that's one. I could go on, but enforcement, that's another thing. Alderman Long calls me all the time about how do we enforce X, Y, Z, and so sometimes it may not be crystal clear in enforcement, but,
So can we get from you guys more specific details beyond what they're talking
What's
about? The
existing
details
right now?
under what they're trying to do. See what's wrong. What are the
Yeah,
10
the
things that are
existing
really
issues.
wrong?
we have.
And then we start, okay, these are the things we gotta fix. Will that help this?
And that's part of what we've been doing with CJIS and Jenna and Sean over the last few months is getting that information. As we've been analyzing the code and asking questions, they've been like, yeah, that's broken, we need to fix it. And enforcement has definitely been on top of the list, permitted uses. So today we're kind of giving you an overview of what we've heard from them. And what our process is. And then, we want to talk at the end here as we're wrapping up about how we involve you and, what levels of involvement and when and how often you guys want to be part of it.
Thank you.
Which is a perfect segue. I'm going to jump to graphics. So, one of the things that you were talking about, Mr. Murphy, as far as what's not working, what's challenging, is taking some of that text and not having a visual to be able to say, this is what this means. So, what Josh and I are getting ready to talk about here are some of the graphics that we're starting to kind of craft to be able to visually describe what's in the text. One of my really bad dad jokes is, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. We've got a lot of graphics that can explain a code component in 135 words. We actually took a code that had 0 graphics for another community. It was over 500 words, and it was talking about building heights and setbacks and the way the building was oriented to the street. And then once you got above a certain height, you had to step the building back. And we literally started asking, and we did this intentionally. We asked the director, we asked the senior planner, we asked one of the junior planners, explain to us what this means.
And why.
And so what we did is we came up with a graphic, and we got it down to 135 words. And basically there's that visual graphic that staff can go, this is what we mean when we're saying, okay, the drive aisle is 2 lanes, it's 24 feet both directions on a 90-degree parking. I can go to that right there, and the lay person out there can see that and go, I understand this. And I'm not going to go into the parking table because we've talked about that a little bit. I want to make sure we've got time for Josh. The parks and buffers.
Thanks, Kelly. We know how passionate and successful y'all have been with your park and open space. And so, the PUD is a great opportunity as your community grows, both commercially and residentially, to make sure that priority is maintained. So, that's your homework. For me tonight, that's your homework, is to think about what your priorities from an open space standpoint are and what expectations you want to put on folks that want to do business in your city moving forward. Because right now it's pretty vague in terms of what types of park and open space need to be developed. There's little to no requirements outside of PUD. So maybe it's thinking about minimum improved and dedicated open space requirements on straight zonings as well as in PUDs. And just we'd love to hear from you all about projects that you've seen that have been successful and projects that have not been, and kind of where your head and priorities at in terms of park and open space. So, because that's really what shapes the kind of the livability, I think, of any community. And again, back to the graphics and just being able to kind of better establish these consistent buffer requirements. I know we're running out of time. I want to give you guys a break before you get into your formal meeting, but again, it's a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so we're going to be building in these types of graphics into the open space and the landscape buffering, the parking, the signage, those types of standards moving forward, so that it's just a more user-friendly experience in working with your ordinance. again, combining standards and expectations with sign graphics. And then, as Steve just mentioned, enforcement is key on the signage. I know your staff has had a lot of issues with enforcing some of the sign rules and codes, and so creating penalties and permit hurdles.
Penalties. Think about the builders that have these, the snipe signs with, homes for sale. So, I mean, if we call them and say, hey, you can't put that sign in the right of way, I mean, we'll call them every week, every Tuesday, Monday morning when we come in, but there's right now no enforcement or penalty for us to, do anything about that. And I think we call it probably 52 times in the year.
All the obnoxious signs in the city that just pop up constantly at gas stations or wherever, you just tell them, take them down. I mean, we could cite to court, but that would be such a lengthy process for that, so it's really hard to actually.
So y'all been just picking them up and taking them to the dump, haven't you?
The small.
That works, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
repetitive.
So there are no penalties at this point?
Not right now. Not yet, not till we get this done, then they'll be coming.
There will be.
Just an example of some of the things we deal with on a day-to-day.
You take them to court a couple of times.
Well, that's
Believe me,
awesome.
I've dealt with Metro and their court system and their code system.
Yeah.
Painful.
It's painful. It's very painful,
Yeah.
especially when you didn't get the notice to begin with.
Yeah.
And then, well, you have to go to
Yeah,
court.
yeah. And
But
that's
then
where the
staff
enforcement
has to
needs
go
to
to
come in
court.
at, for sure.
Yeah.
With having that in.
But then
Yeah.
staff has to go to court, so it ties y'all up too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at least we'll
It
be
takes a
able.
while to get to court.
Yeah.
And they still got to sign them.
That's just one piece of that. We're looking to be able to, have more teeth in, from A to Z, have more teeth in.
Or we could just fine them though, can't we?
But we don't have a
We
basis
don't
right now.
have anything in there.
Yeah, we don't have any, yeah.
So it sounds like y'all have some thoughts of what needs to be done. Okay.
Yeah, but I want to, like,
Yeah.
be transparent and, get in.
Yeah, this has been that kind of look behind the curtain that we've been working behind for the last few months. It's really, it's been exploratory. We've just been kind of digging and poking and getting good information from staff, and we wanted to just share some of our findings and, more importantly, introduce you to the team and what we've been doing and kind of initiate the steering committee, which is who you are.
Well, we don't do what they do though, and we need to go there first and say, look, this is the problem, this is what we need, and then we can discuss whether that's a good idea or not. But most of the time, what they want to do is going to be a pretty good idea because they've had plenty of time to deal with it.
Yep, it's been a collaborative process for sure. Everything you're hearing has been vetted through your staff so far.
Yeah. And I just want to make a comment on staff, and that includes stormwater, parks, our teams here, so it's all encompassing.
What do you say? They're all incompetent.
They're all here. Not at all. They're all encompassing.
A little bit of that.
No. And I probably can't say enough about Sean, but Sean he has been an asset to us, not only on this other project, but on this, he's, helped, put the slides together, and, he's with us until, July, but he's been very instrumental in, kind of being a liaison. Like, I was just thinking, if this was just my day-to-day to have to do this, since January, I don't know that we would have this much detail in it, so I can't say enough about Sean.
Right. Good deal.
So, just this is our last slide, talking about timelines. Where are we at? We're almost to the end of phase one. This was just our initial conversation about the assessment. The second half of this year, we're going to be deep into the production, and I think, it probably behooves y'all to have a separate offline, discussion like this with Thegis and Jenna about, what meetings we need to set up moving forward, what check-ins we need to have with y'all being the steering committee. Our takeaway by the end of phase one is to share a document with you that puts those top 10 things in a list, that gives you the detailed annotated outline of kind of, if this is the assessment, this is our summary of that, and these are our high-level recommendations moving forward, and we want you to say, Thegis, do you agree? Steering committee, do we agree? And bless that so we can move forward. Because the last thing we want is to get to the end of phase 2 and have you guys open up a document that say, well, why in the heck did we do this?
Yeah.
So, thank you for your time tonight. We appreciate it. We'll share documents, share contact information. You know, I think it's easiest to have it kind of going through staff so they can help manage the communications, but we'll be very open and transparent with you and answer questions. We enjoy the collaborative process. So thank you very much.
Do you have any further discussion? Do you have anything else to add, Stevie?
No.
Jerry?